that lull from free agency ahead of the draft, right? You're right in that spot right there. So this is Believe in Bills, by the way, presented by FanDuel. And we're going to get in a little bit of roster analysis as this turnover has taken place from Sean McDermott to Joe Brady and what Brandon Beane is doing and all of those things. We'll just kind of go through maybe quickly position by position here to get some takes maybe on what they've acquired and what they might acquire and look to acquire in the draft. And I'd like you, if possible, again, the show we did earlier this week was really a breakdown of your one-on-one interview with Brandon Beane, but by all means, feel free to revisit that as the analysis continues here and analyze some of these positions. So that being said, let's pop it open here. We'll go offense first, right? And let's just start up. I'll have you take the lead. We'll go right with quarterback, get that out of the way. They obviously know what they have in Josh Allen. It's what they're building around him with now Kyle Allen in behind him. Your thoughts on where things stand? Let's go with Allen, too. Let's just kind of throw whatever as he recovers from injuries, all of those things, where he is in his window, whatever, and now who they have behind him. You go ahead.
I mean, look, he's going to be fine. He told us when he met with us after whatever the day they introduced the coordinators, he could have played a game that day if he had to. He was on crutches because he had surgery. He's going to be fine. Now, whether he does much in this, OTA window, who knows? I mean, he doesn't need to do any of that. So he will be perfectly fine come training camp when it matters most. Kyle Allen, look, they couldn't keep Mitch Trubisky forever. There was probably a point where Trubisky said, do I want to continue to just be Josh Allen's caddy, or do I want to go somewhere where maybe I'd have a chance to play? So he goes to Tennessee with Dable, and it was probably a good move. He made some money going there, and the Bills really couldn't afford to do that. So Kyle Allen, another of Josh's golfing buddies, comes in. Yeah. And, Adam, we say this every year. It doesn't even matter because he's been such a tank. He's been indestructible. You knock on wood, but hopefully we never even see Kyle Allen, and he's just another guy in the room. I mean, Josh trusts him. They've had a good relationship in the past. It'll be fine. And then Shane Buechele is your practice squad quarterback. So they're all set at quarterback.
All right. So, I mean, just to follow up, the one thing I felt about Trubisky when he did get in there, and especially thinking back to that Jet game, where I think it was the first pass he threw was like a 30-something yard dart. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Spot on. And I do feel like they've been very fortunate as far as Allen is concerned. Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, his durability and everything, it's one of his great strengths, and I'm not detracting from that. But the law of averages, I feel like, could kick in here at some point. That's Trubisky, I felt, had evolved into a luxury, don't you, at that position?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Look, they downgraded. They're less at quarterback right now with Kyle Allen opposed to Trubisky. But again, you hope it never even comes to a point where it matters. But they definitely downgraded, and I understand why. I mean, they can't, you can't pay for what they're paying these other guys. They couldn't invest. They're only investing it's not even $2 million on the cap, I think, for Kyle Allen. So they had to do it, and you just hope that Josh Allen stays healthy.
Okay, running back. That revolves around rushing champion James Cook, obviously. Ty Johnson, Reggie Gilliam. We should mention, to the New England Patriots. We know that. Ray Davis also in the mix. Look, I mean, it's Cook and Johnson. We know what they bring to the table. We know what Cook has done. He's such a key feature and really one of the reasons that Joe Brady, when Brady took over as offensive coordinator, you could see the influence of the run, how all that changed. And it's really evolved into the Bills' first rushing champion since O.J. Simpson. So I think we know the personality of this offense moving forward, obviously, given the fact that it's Brady moving from coordinator to head coach and is going to continue to call the plays, and Cook will be a primary feature, as always.
Yeah, nothing changes here. I mean, Cook's workload last season was big. It was the biggest of his career, so you hope that he can bounce back. He really didn't, as far as I can recall, he did not suffer an injury that really gave him any trouble. I'm sure he was banged up a little bit, but there was never, I don't even recall him being on the injury report. So he got through, but now you wonder about cumulative effect moving forward. His workload has gone up each year he's been here. But they're set there. Ty Johnson's a good guy for what he does, third down back. Ray Davis is the number 2, really, if Cook needs a blow, because Johnson's more of a third down guy. And then, you'll see Frank Gore is your practice squad guy. Maybe they bring somebody into camp, Adam, as a fifth body to, I don't know if they would compete with one of the top 3, or Davis and Johnson, but maybe compete with Frank Gore for that practice squad spot. But they're set at what running back too. There's nothing to really discuss there.
All right. So there is something to discuss at wide receiver.
Yeah, we could definitely discuss wide receiver.
There has been
doing that for a year or 2 years in a row here.
Right. And there continues to be, but it's certainly in this forum, we have to get into it. So the trade for DJ Moore. Look, he's their number 1. There's no question about it. In terms of what he brings, he is that downfield threat. He brings the dynamic and the element they've been missing, but does he bring enough of it? And who knows what they might add in the draft as well. But given where they've been and who's still there, has Brandon Beane done enough at the receiver position to finally answer those questions and get this offense to the place it needs to be and make the most out of Josh Allen's downfield abilities?
Yeah, I think they're getting close. The DJ Moore trade definitely gives them their new number 1 receiver. He does a lot of things well. And what I like most about him, Adam, is he's been available. He's never really missed games because of injury, maybe 1 or 2 here or there. In 8 years, he's had production nonstop. It went down last year. We've already discussed why it went down when they acquired him. But still, he's a guy that's going to come into this offense, and I'm pretty sure he's going to have more than 50 catches for the Bills like he had with an inconsistent quarterback in Caleb Williams last year. So I think they're fine there. And then, you slot in Khalil Shakir and probably Josh Palmer. Are you going to be if you have 3 on the field, those are going to be the top 3. Keon Coleman will have to find his way, figure out, what his role is going to be. And, I'm sure he's going to be in the mix. Brady and Beane both said they think it's still in there for him, and then he can get things, he can figure it out and help the team. So there's your top 4. After that, this is where we can talk about adding. Tyrell Shavers won't be available probably a good chunk of the year. He got an ACL in January, so I wouldn't count on him very much at all. And Mecole Hardman is technically the only other receiver, veteran receiver they have on the team. They brought him back on a reserve futures contract, but he's going to be in the mix as your punt returner.
Sure.
If he can give you anything as a receiver, I think those days are past him. He's a guy you could send on a fly route, but I don't know what he really gives you outside of being a punt returner. So do you add? It would surprise me if they signed a free agent. I don't think they want to spend more money than they've already spent on, they've already spent pretty good money on Moore, Shakir, and Palmer. That's a lot of investment there. I would say they're not going to draft one in the first round. I'd be really surprised if that happened. But with that 3rd round pick, or, if we go into day 3, I think they will pick somebody. Again, I think they feel pretty good about the top 4. That includes Coleman. So now you're just adding a guy for depth, and then, you get a young guy in the pipeline, and if it's a 1st round pick, he's in the pipeline for 5 years. So they might do that, but I don't think so. You don't think so? I think he feels pretty good about where he is right now.
No. I don't think I don't think you're looking at a 1st round addition. Of a receiver.
I don't think so. I think they got to go defense there, and it's just, I don't think they're going to do it in the 1st round.
We're going to have plenty of shows to get into this. To see him trade down would not surprise me at all.
Yeah,
the trade out of 26, especially, okay, look, so if it's a deep draft at linebacker, right? And I'm digressing here a little bit. I feel like if he can move down from 26, reacquire that 2nd round pick or whatever, still get a defensive player and maybe something else a little bit later on, right?
Yeah.
I think somewhere in there you'll see a receiver added if it matches up.
I think absolutely. If they would get that 2nd round pick and say, I don't know what else they would get, a 3rd or a 4th round back,
right? You
see the receiver maybe in that spot, but I think defense will be the first pick,
sure,
wherever it's going to be.
Which we'll get to, and we'll talk about the reasons why when we assess the defense. Let's go tight end here. Obviously, Dalton Kincaid. When you look at the receiver position, right, you have to factor in him. Dawson Knox back on a rework contract, and a guy I really like who's shown a knack for getting open, known primarily for his blocking, but we've seen him emerge in key spots in the passing game at key times, and that's Jackson Hawes, right? I really like what he brings to the table, primarily his blocking, but what he can also add in the passing game. I think you'll see more of that continue to emerge, with Kincaid being the primary feature, as you'd expect.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're rock solid at tight end. They've probably got as good a tight end room as any team in the league, based on what you just said. You've got a receiving tight end in Kincaid. You've got Knox, who can do a little bit of both, and Jackson Hawes is a terrific blocker, maybe one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. And I think they can develop him, to be more of a two-dimensional player, which would help because, when he's on the field, sometimes you're tipping off that you're going to run the ball. So if he can get out and make some plays as a receiver, which he did a few times last year, I think that's terrific. And then you've got Kaliki Latu would be your practice squad guy. So yeah, they're rock solid at the first three positions we've talked about, or three of the four. They are set in stone right now.
All right, offensive line. Where does that fit in terms of that description, right? I mean, bringing
it's close.
To begin the assessment of that, right? You have to one of the headlines, and I don't know that all Bills fans necessarily appreciate the importance and the significance of bringing back Connor McGovern and making sure he stayed right where he is at center. That may have been one of the biggest moves, or as big a move as they've made this offseason so far.
Oh, absolutely. That was big. They could not. We talked about this several times on several shows. They really couldn't go into the season trying to fill two holes on an offensive line that's been one of the best in the league. So getting McGovern back, now you've got 4/5 of your lining in place, and the center is in a very important position. It's more important than left guard. So they got to find a left guard. And really on the roster, it's tough to see that player. I know they re-signed Alec Anderson to the RFA contract. I don't see him as a starter. Maybe he'll surprise us. I guess David Edwards kind of surprised us, but I don't think that Anderson's the same player by any stretch that David Edwards was. So you've got him in the mix. They've got Nick Broker, who they drafted in the 7th round a few years ago. He went to Houston for 2 years, really as a special teams guy, and now he's back. When I was talking to Bean that day, I asked him about Tylen Grable, because they've got, this is actually before Ryan Vandermark got the offer sheet from the Vikings. I was assuming he's back as your swing tackle, and I asked him about Grable possibly moving inside, and he said we've cross-trained him as a tackle and a guard. So that was a possibility early in the week when I talked to him. Now they might need to have Tylen Grable concentrate on the tackle, being the swing tackle, if they decide not to match the offer sheet for Vandermark. So that kind of throws things up in the air a little bit. Chase Lunt was a draft pick last year. He could potentially be moved inside to guard, but Adam, I think they got to find somebody. It's Cedric Van Granger. Bean told me he's a center only. They would not try him at guard. He's going to be the backup to McGovern. So, it wouldn't shock me that they sign a veteran in free agency, a David Edwards type deal 3 years ago, where it was like 2 years for whatever. No, it was 1 year for $3 million, maybe. That they could do. They've got room to do that on the cap. And then maybe you spend a draft pick, but left guard is a hole. They've got to get that figured out.
I'd switch to the defensive side, and here's where a lot of change is going to take place. Unlike when we know the basic composition of the personality of the offense and what they're trying to add and why. It's a little bit more shrouded, obviously, on the defensive side, with Jim Leonard taking over as defensive coordinator and switching the scheme and all of that. This will revisit a little bit of what we talked about the other day in your conversation with Brandon Bean, but like the 3-4 now. Let's just kind of fill in for our listeners and viewers here, what they have, because I think it's a point you and Bean discussed. And when you look at it, when you break out the depth chart and slot in everybody, I mean, they don't have all of the key pieces, but they have a lot of them in terms of what they need to transition up front, right?
They do. I mean, Bradley Chubb is really the ideal player to be the edge outside linebacker. They didn't technically have that player on the roster. He has played this role in a 3-4 defense. So that was a good get for them. And they're not paying a huge amount of money. I mean, they paid him, but I think he comes in as like the 30th ranked edge rusher money wise. So it's not like a huge expenditure there. And then you've got to figure out, I think Michael Hoyt is definitely a stand-up edge rushing linebacker. He's done that with the Rams in the past. Russo will have to transition. He's always been a hand on the dirt for defensive end in a 4-3. He's going to have to learn how to play standing up and, occasionally dropping into coverage. So here's where it gets, really interesting. You could have him as a defensive end in the 3-4, sort of the role that I thought Ed Oliver could play. TJ Sanders could be in that role. I think Deion Walker can play sort of the nose tackle position, but he could also go out and be a D tackle in that 3 tech. They could do that with him. So that's why it is possible and probable maybe that they're going to pick an edge rusher, because they need, I think ideally they would want somebody who is a faster, explosive player on the edge than Greg Rousseau is. They could move Rousseau down in the 3-4 defensive end spot and get a guy in the draft who is explosive and fast. So that's why I think that's a very big possibility that they'll do that. And then Ed Oliver, I think they've got pieces in place right now, Adam, that they could slot in pretty easily to those positions, those new types of positions on the D line. And it's going to be a matter of, do they add the edge rusher? I'm not really counting on Landon Jackson for anything. I'm not even sure where they're going to put him on this line, where he would actually fit. I don't see him as a stand-up edge guy. He would have to be, in the 3-4 part of it. Javon Solomon, Dwayne Carter, I don't know where those guys fit. I mean, Dwayne Carter, he to me would be an ideal trade candidate, either at the trade deadline or, late in training camp if a team needs a D tackle. I really don't see where he fits in this defense. And it's too bad. It's a 3rd round pick 2 years ago, and he missed all of last year, but he really didn't show much as a rookie. We'll see. I mean, I just don't see a role for him, but they do have some big decisions to make on that line, trying to figure out who's going to be where.
All right. So let's get back to the draft discussion then, as we alluded to earlier here in the show. We both agree that, if they stay at 26, or even if they trade down, the first player they pick is going to be on the defensive side. And you could make a case, as you just did, and I think a lot of the fan base feels like edge rusher is something you might see. I feel strongly, and I'm repeating myself here, but I feel like linebacker is another spot, right?
Yeah, I agree.
If based on how the board is laid out, and it's a deep draft at linebacker, and all of those things, a very good class. As you discuss all of that, and given Terrell Bernard the player that he is, but his shortcomings in terms of size and durability and all those things that we've seen the last couple of seasons with him, and with a new defensive coordinator wanting a player, I think, tailored specifically to a key role for Jim Leonard in that defense. If there's someone there they like, I could see the priority being linebacker very, very early, if not first in this draft.
I don't understand why people kind of laugh at picking an inside linebacker in the first round. I mean, if it's a player, if it's a position that you need, and there's a guy there that you love, why not make the pick? My argument here, Adam, it's pretty simple. They've got a bunch of D linemen on this team right now. We just talked about the 3 edge guys. If you want to stand up Russo, Hoyt, and Chubb, you've got guys up front on that line: Oliver, Sanders, Walker, maybe Landon Jackson, maybe Dwayne Carter. You've got guys there. Linebacker, what do you have? You have Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams, and then you've got, Buffalo Joe, who I'm not sure you want to rely on Buffalo Joe to be a starter. Keontae Jenkins, Jimmy Charlo's on the practice squad. You don't have linebackers. So if you've got a guy at number 26, and you mentioned it, everyone has said this is a really deep class for linebackers. Well, great. If it's really deep, then why not get the best guy you can get at that? Why wait to the 3rd round? Just because it's deep, that doesn't mean you're going to get a guy who can play 3 downs for the next 5 or 6 years or whatever it's going to be. Go get the guy right away. Dorian Williams, I told you when I talked to Bean, one of his issues in the 3 years he's been here, Bean said he thought Sean's defense was very complicated. There was a lot in the game plan every week, and he thinks Dorian Williams had trouble processing that. He's a great athlete, and he really couldn't be a great athlete because he was always thinking where he had to be. Bean's contention is that he thinks this defense, not that they're going to dumb it down for him, but he's going to be a little bit more black and white what he has to do, and he thinks he's going to thrive in that situation, which is fine. If he does, great. But why not get you? He's a free agent after this year. And Terrell Bernard, I guess his contract, you could get out of it if you wanted to after this year and not feel too much pain. Why not get your guy? Why not get the guy who's going to wear the green dot for maybe the next 4 or 5 years?
Right.
It's exactly what I would do. They don't have any depth at that position. Now, I did get the sense from him that I think Shaq Thompson could be returning. He mentioned that, hey, Shaq's still out there. If we want to do that, we could probably do that. I think, and he's played in a 3-4 defense, so I think he'd be a perfect fit. Maybe he beats out either Bernard or Williams, but if not, he's a terrific depth guy. So now at least you got 3. But I would, if it's me, I would. Edge rusher is really important, but I think linebacker is where they really should go. But that's just me, and I'm with you. You agree, but I think we're kind of on an island there. I think a lot of people are saying it's got to be edge rusher. So we'll see.
All right, let's get into the secondary here, and we've seen some obvious change there, which they've needed to address the safety position, which they have with C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Geno Stone at safety as well, and D. Alford, a versatile cornerback. I mean, there's a lot of transition there on the back end, and they still have some needs, I think, don't you?
They do. They need a third corner, first and foremost. I mean, Max Hairston and Christian Benford are all they really have at the position. I don't think it's going to be Trey White. I got the sense from Bean that they're probably not going to do that. So I don't think he's coming back. So they got to find a veteran guy. I mean, you could always draft a guy in the middle rounds or, day 3, but what's that player really going to give you? So I think they got to find a free agent. Again, low budget deal, 1 year, $3 or $4 million, whatever it's going to be, and at least back yourself up. Because Max Hairston, hey, look, he had a rookie year where he couldn't stay healthy. He had 2 different injuries. So he's a small guy. We talked about that with Terrell Bernard. He's undersized. So can you rely on him to stay healthy all year? I don't know. So they need a boundary guy as for competition, but mainly for depth. D. Alford, solid pick for the slot. He's not going to play as much as Taron Johnson, so they're okay there. C.J. Gardner-Johnson can be a slot guy if need be. He's going to start at safety. Geno Stone is there for depth. So they've done some good things in the back end for sure. Now you look at the draft, Adam. Would it surprise me if they picked a safety in the first round? It might a little bit, but if you're thinking you've got Gardner-Johnson and Geno Stone for 1 year, you could pick a safety. There's a couple good ones that should be available late in the first round that you can get right now, plug them in as the, mentor behind those 2 guys, and then you move forward with that player for the next 4 years. That wouldn't surprise me either. Safety is, we're not in Sean McDermott's era anymore. You know how much he valued his safeties, but I got to believe Jim Leonard probably values safety too. So if that wouldn't shock me if they did that. It would surprise me, but it wouldn't shock me.
What about Tre'Davious White?
Yeah, I said I don't see that happening. Being
for depth.
Look, I think it's been there, done that with Trey White. I'd be surprised if they bring him back. Like if I'm picking between Shaq Thompson and Trey White, who I think are the 2 most obvious candidates to come back, I think Shaq Thompson.
Shaq Thompson. Yeah, given the priority we talked about at linebacker and that issue.
And this defense is changing now. This defense, they're going to play more man coverage. I think the corners are going to play more man coverage. That's not Trey White's game. Trey White's game is playing zone. He can play man, but I think as much as they're going to ask their corners to play man, I don't see it as a fit. So I'd be a little bit surprised if he's the guy they bring back.
All right. As far as special teams are concerned, we should probably hit that here. You mentioned return options or whatever, and kicker. What the hell is going to happen there?
Well, Tyler Bass is back. I mean, Bean said
Mhm.
he's perfectly confident that he's going to be able to kick this year. They redid his contract. I mean, he was a guy that you considered maybe they release him and go. There's kickers out there that could come in and play. Matt Prater came in and was terrific last year, 40 years old, and he was great. To save money, they could have released Bass, but they decided to give him. They reworked his contract, so I think he'll be there. They
You
re-signed.
think he's? I mean, they're obviously confident. I guess I raised that question only because that was a fluky, mercurial injury.
Yeah,
Last year.
I think they
and
are.
How does that trend? They would have to be confident that he's going to be fine to do what they did.
Yeah, I think they believe he's ready to go. And look, Adam, kickers, all you got to do is go to your contacts, man. And they did it last year, right?
Yeah.
They had Tyler. All of a sudden, the end of August, they decide he's not ready. Boom, Matt Prater's available. Remember, there's only 32 jobs, but there's a hell of a lot more than 32 NFL kickers out there. Somebody's always looking for a job, and they happen to really luck out with Matt Prater last year. Not so much with Michael Badgley. That didn't work out great. But Matt Prater was a solid addition. So they might have him on hold, right? Hey,
Mhm.
Matt, we'll see you in August. If Tyler's not looking good, come on back. So that's possible. They re-signed Wisnowski. I thought that was a good move, cheap.
Yep.
He punted really well. He came in, I think it was week 5, and he really settled down their punting situation. So that was a good move. Reed Ferguson, obviously back. Now return, yeah, they've got some things to figure out. Ray Davis was, a revelation on kickoff returns. A lot of that had to do with the special teams coach, who I think did a really nice job in scheming things up. So the new guy, Jeff Rogers, he's been doing this for 20 some years. He'll have to, figure that out. If they keep Mecole Hardman, I would think he settles your punt return duty, but they might not keep him. It depends what they do at the position at wide receiver. I mean, if they've got 5 they like, do you just keep Mecole Hardman to be the punt returner? Maybe, but
do you want to expose Shakir that way?
I don't think you want to. I think they should stop doing that with him. And he doesn't really give him much. He catches the ball cleanly, but he's not really, he doesn't give you really much of anything back there. 4 or 5 yards if he happens to return one. I think you'd look for a little bit more explosiveness, which is why Hardman, that could be a value. That could be a value play for the Bills, that they think he's not a cheap contract. I mean, it's not going to cost him, what is it? I think he's the vet minimum, actually. So it wouldn't kill him to do that.
All right. So as we get ready to wrap this up here, a couple of other points. Kind of in general, we've kind of sifted through it at a slow time like this. And so you can project into what they're going to add in the draft, and it's debatable how much immediate impact they're going to get from that, right? Especially as the rounds go on. Although the Bills have done well, and they had better than near the top of the draft for GM and now president of football operations, Brandon Beane. But a lot of the criticism has been that there hasn't been enough change, right? And I think fans just in general have a concern about what are they going to see in the fall, obviously, and how much more competitive is this team going to be, and have they answered enough of the questions to ultimately get over the top with a first-year head coach in Joe Brady and all the changes they've instituted specifically in the defensive side, right, with Jim Leonard and there's a lot of unknowns with how that defense is going to, the personality of it and how it's going to specifically execute on the field. All of that. I mean, it was Tim Graham of The Athletic who's sort of spearheaded this debate, one of the key articles written, and there's been a lot of talk about it. I mean, is it still Josh Allen, everything built around him, which obviously it is to a great extent, but have they changed enough to evolve to the point where they can surpass the shortcomings they've had on the postseason to this point?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough to really gauge that right now. I mean, but the offense didn't really have to change much, Adam. They needed a number 1 receiver. I think they've got that, or they think they've got that at least. And you got to figure out left guard. Everything else on the offense stays the same. So again, Bean makes the argument, yeah, we've averaged 30 points a game for the last, whatever it's been, 2 or 3 years. He's right. The offense didn't need a whole lot of work outside of, go get a receiver who can actually play. And they've done that. Defense is where we don't really know. It's going to be real tough to gauge, what this defense is in this new system that they're going to run. So do they have good players on defense? They do. they've lost a couple guys, but for the most part, they got a lot of dudes coming back on defense. The guys they've lost are not Daquan Jones, Trey White. I think Shaq Thompson will come back. They haven't lost all that much. Epinesa is now gone too. Taron Johnson. Yeah, they've seen some guys go out, but they've also brought some guys in. And I think it's now you've just got to figure out what they can do in the scheme. Will things be better? You hope so. This is why they made this move, right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't make this move to stay where they've been. I think they potentially will be a better defense this year. But they've still got to add some pieces. They're not done by a long shot.
Okay, so that kind of sets the stage for the draft coming up and whatever else they decide to do in the free agency area leading up to that. FanDuel, presenting sponsor for this show and others. We're in the Believe Network. We're going to change things up a little bit here. We've talked about the Bills being division favorites, Super Bowl odds, all those things. We're going to switch gears and talk hockey here for just a second because, the Buffalo Sabres have proven as a force to be reckoned with. There's nothing fluky about this turnaround, and they finally realized in terms of the talent, the change at GM, and how that kind of lit a fire and allowed a lot of that top-end talent that's been stagnant in this organization to emerge. They're playing as well, if not better, than anyone in the National Hockey League right now. Winners of 11 of 12 games. First place in the Atlantic Division, tied with Carolina for the conference lead at this particular point. 92 points. FanDuel Stanley Cup odds has them eighth at plus 1,900. And
think back to December. Could you think that was possible?
No,
right?
But adding to that point, I think they should probably be higher. I mean, to me, Carolina is the team that could stand in their way in the conference in the most legitimate way. I'm not saying you get into the postseason where a lot of these guys are playing for the first time, and so there's some unknowns, right?
Yeah,
you have to gauge that, and you've covered plenty of hockey through the years, as I have as well with the Amherst. But I was asked last night, we were at an event for Roswell Park, my wife and I, and someone came up to our table and wanted to talk hockey. How legitimate is the Sabres team? And I could easily see them winning a couple of rounds, maybe getting to a conference final, and who knows after that if the goaltending holds up. I think, assuming Colorado's in there, Colorado, there are teams that might be too much for them in a 7-game series at this point. But when you've got young talent realizing full potential with some experience now, the NHL games under their belt, it's hard to put a ceiling on anything at this point, given that way that team is playing.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Adams is no longer there, but you do have to give him a little bit of a nod because this is kind of his team, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Kekalainen has come in, he added a couple pieces at the deadline. I think the biggest thing with the GM firing and, promoting of Kekalainen it was change, which was needed, but it also lit a fire under their ass, right? And they finally realized, okay, they did do something here. They did fire the GM. Now it's serious. And I think that was the biggest thing that happened when they made the GM change. But this is a roster that Kevin Adams is largely responsible for. So, hey, good for him. It finally came together. Too bad it didn't come together in time to save his job, I guess. But what I love about the roster, you're right. They've got young talent, Adam, but they really have some good veteran, gritty guys on this team, which has always been a problem for the Sabres. Now they've added in, McLeod and Zucker, and now Carrick's over there, and Logan Stanley, even Shen, who's just an old guy, but they've got some veteran guys that are playing next to these young kids, and the mesh has just been great. And the goaltending. Sure. I mean, we haven't seen goaltending like this since Ryan Miller left town, right? Sure. I mean, we haven't. They're both playing really, really well, Luukkonen and Lyon. So I see them winning a round, maybe 2. I think it would be tough to win the conference. I think they're maybe not quite ready for that. But Adam, who cares, man?
Right.
Like, who is going to care if this team wins only 1 round and gets knocked out in the second round? Nobody is going to care. I think they'll be disappointed because they've played so well, and now the expectation has risen. But just getting to the playoffs is, and I sound like, oh yeah, I'm settling. No, I'm not settling. It's been 14 friggin' years.
Right.
Getting to the playoffs was really big for this team. So get there, maybe win a round. Hey, if you can win 2, awesome. But I think it's a stretch to say they're going to be playing for the Stanley Cup this year.
Yeah, I mean, Carolina's going to be.
Could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong.
But you get them in, and because things change, in terms of the matchups, right, night after night in a 7-game series, the dynamic changes, and obviously
and you have to stay healthy.
The level of intensity and play, you see that shift from the end of the regular season to where, I mean, teams could never maintain a playoff pace for 82 games during a regular season. I mean, it would just be so, and that's the beauty of that sport and the spring and postseason hockey, right? But I want to see what they've done translate to that level of intensity against experienced teams and players in a postseason situation. Right. I mean, there are still questions for them to answer, and it's been far too long for so many of these prospects where they haven't been able to play in postseason. So we'll get a much better indication of sort of where they're, but they're playing with house money at this point. I mean,
I think so for sure.
Given where they've been, and as far as the one other point, the gentleman last night asked me about how a GM change could lead to this level of turnaround. And I gave him the comparison because it really had started, if you look to when they actually made the switch to Kekalainen, I think they'd won like 3 in a row. I could be wrong on that, but it was they had kicked things in. It was a game in Edmonton, I think, where the shift happened, and you could see suddenly things were starting to click and come together. Talking with Paul Hamilton of WGR Radio, Sports Radio 550, and he's our insider on Channel 2 as well. We have him on Sports Talk Live Buffalo. He said within the organization, the players knew that was coming, right? Just the vibe had filtered down to the locker room that Pegula was going to make that change. And I had said, through the years, and maybe you could use yourself at the Democrat and Chronicle all through the years, whenever there was, and we didn't have many, given the success that Channel 2 has enjoyed through the years ratings-wise, but when there's a change at general manager, right, in a television station, you report to a news director, right, when you work. So a news director is kind of your head coach, and president and general manager is like the GM of a team. You know that person is going to make decisions on your contract. It's a fresh set of eyes sort of evaluating you. And he rightly said everyone in the organization is under evaluation, right? Yeah. And I think Adams, there'd been a relationship there. And I think Adams had fallen victim to maybe what Darcy Regier did during the end of his run as GM, where he kind of fell in love with the set of guys that he had. Right. Yeah. I think they had a sense of that, and Lindy Ruff's message began to sour at that time. And it just, that post-lockout success that they had, that core, and obviously Drury and Briere moving on in free agency was a huge factor. But, it kind of sours if you stay stagnant for too long, right? And those relationships exist and the dynamic doesn't change. You've seen what has happened. And I think that was going on far, far too long with the Sabres. So when you make a switch to kind of a hard-ass guy like Kekalainen, that can change the entire vibe and the mindset that a lot of these guys are bringing to the ring. It shouldn't come down to that, but in a lot of organizations, given the example I just did, maybe you could add to it, outside of sports, inside and outside of sports, it sometimes can. And in this case, I think it did with the Sabres.
It's exactly what I said when I talked about it earlier. I think the change was what was important. Adams had to go. It wasn't working. Kekalainen comes in and everyone's antenna went up, right? All of a sudden they're like, okay, this is a new guy. He might see things. It's not like he's been Kevin Adams' assistant for 5 years and was on board with the program. This guy was just hired at the start of this season. So he's coming in with a totally fresh set of eyes. He was in Columbus, where he was a guy who was known to not be afraid of making moves. So when they got to that trade deadline this year, everybody was wondering, am I on the block? Even though they were playing really well and you weren't going to upend it too much, pretty much every guy on that team had to be wondering, hey, maybe I'm part of a deal to, get these guys over the hump. Maybe they're going to sacrifice me to bring in a Sam Carrick or whatever it was, right? I think the change was, it did exactly what they hoped it was going to do. It kicked everybody in the ass, and the result is one of the best 40-game stretches, not only in Sabres history, but NHL history. I think it was, like I saw somewhere today, it was like the 6th best 40-game stretch of any team in league history. Think of some of the teams that have played in this league. The Canadians lost 8 games one year in the 70s. I mean, it's crazy what this team has done.
Well, in a salary cap era situation, right? I mean, that's the other thing. You're comparing him to some teams where that wasn't the case,
Yeah, right.
with the and that's why I'm hesitant to put it when I'm like, you can't. It's tough to define. I agree with you about when they get into a conference final situation or whatever, if they make it that far, where it might be a little much for them. But it's hard to, given what they've done in very real terms on the ice and putting together this stretch of games and what it compares to historically, right? I'm hesitant to put a ceiling on anything at this point. I want to see how much of that potential they can realize.
You're right. We shouldn't put a ceiling on it. We shouldn't put a ceiling on it. You're absolutely right.
All right. So look at that. There's some hockey talk here, I'm believing. That's a first.
We should have saved that for next week, Adam. It's going to be a really slow week. We just blew a whole podcast talking about the Sabres. Oh, we could do this
All
more.
right.
We could definitely do it more.
We're at 42 minutes, which goes far beyond like our recommended 30-minute limit. But I think, it's for those who are interested, a lot of Bills fans are obviously on board. Look at the attendance, what's happening in Buffalo with the Sabres now, and how it really rounds back into the true sports town that it is when both of these franchises are firing. The mid-2000s, you saw that the Bills were in the drought, but when you had Drury Briere and what this town turns into from a hockey perspective, when the team, for all the frustration, look at how fast the fans come back when you've got a product on the ice, now the quality that it is. So it's great. It's good to talk about it. And I think we're going to have no choice but to kind of chime in on the Sabres as well here as we continue. All right, man. So have a good weekend. All right.
All right.
Enjoy. Be good. All of you as well. Thanks for being with us on what is now an extended edition of Believe in Bills / Sabres. And we'll be back next week, as always, with a couple of more shows here as the offseason marches on. For Sal Maiorana, Rochester DNC, I'm Adam Benigni, WGRZ TV and Sports Talk Live Buffalo. Thanks for being with us. As always, Believe in Bills, presented by FanDuel.